Hello, this is a V-Ray exterior lighting tutorial. We'll be covering lighting an exterior scene in V-Ray using an HDRI sky dome only. This is a follow-on from my previous tutorial in which we lit a scene using a sky dome coupled with a VraySun. We won't be doing that obviously in this instance. We are just going to be using a sky dome. As you can see, I've got a very simple test scene here, which is similar to what we had previously with the house as the main subject in the foreground. I'll just do a quick test render of this so you can see what we're looking to achieve. Okay, so the goal is very simple. We want to light our subject with the HDRI sky dome. As you can see, it provides a natural quality of light to our scene. We'd also like to get reasonably sharp, crisp shadows coming from that sky dome. We'd also like the sky dome to appear in reflections, as you can see from the sphere in the foreground. And finally, as previous, we'd like to get a clean alpha channel for use in post-production later on. So what I'm going to do is reset that scene and we can start from the beginning. Okay, here we are in our blank 3ds Max scene. To start, I'm going to merge in some of the components that we need. So initially the house that I've modeled and also a simple sphere. You will see that the house features a very simple white material, as I've done in previous examples. I'm also going to create a V-Ray plane to receive the shadows, act as the ground plane and receive the shadows in the scene. I'm also going to assign the same material that's on the house. I'm going to assign that to the V-Ray plane. The purpose of the sphere is to reflect the environment in the scene. So what I need for that is just a highly reflective material. I'm just going to create a very simple V-Ray material and turn the reflection value all the way up to 100%. And I'll also just engage the background so you can see that that is reflecting, and then assign that to the sphere. Next step is to create a V-Ray camera. So come over to the Create panel, under Cameras, drop down to V-Ray and select V-Ray Physical Camera. Then roughly at the origin, I'm going to click and create a camera which is pointed roughly at the subject. And in the top view, I'm going to just align this camera so we are looking nice and square at the subject matter. I might also make this a non-targeted camera, so it just gets rid of the target helper there. And I will raise the camera up to roughly eye level, so in this instance 175 centimeters. Then with the camera selected, I'm going to hit C in the viewport we wish to make sure that we're looking through the camera. I'm also going to hit Shift F to engage our safe frames, and then I'm going to pull back to make sure that our entire subject is included within our frame. Before we move on, I just want to look very quickly at the camera settings, because these are always important in V-Ray. A lot of it can be left at default. It's my personal preference to turn off vignetting. This is an effect which can be added later in post-production, so I don't feel it needs to be included at render time, so I'm going to uncheck that. When rendering using an HDRI, I also think it's really important to set your white balance to neutral. You can test the different white balance settings and see what you prefer, but I feel neutral is the most applicable to lighting with HDRI. Having tested this scene before, I do know that based on the HDRI that I'm going to be using, I need an f-stop number of 6.8 roughly to appropriately expose the scene. As that value increases, obviously your scene will get darker. As it lowers, it'll get brighter. You will need to just test different values there based on the HDRI you're using. Okay, I think we are now ready to move on and set up some lighting. To do that, we need to create a V-Ray dome light. So under the Create panel, I'm going to come over to Lights, drop that down to V-Ray, and then select V-Ray Light. And anywhere in the scene you like, really, you can just click. Coming over to the Modify panel, we want to change that from a plain light to a dome light. And we also want to change our multiplier from 30 to 1. Having done this exercise before, I know that it's a good idea to up our subdivisions from 8 to 16. 8 just tends to give quite a noisy render. 16 seems adequately clean for our test renders. In the texture slot, I'm just going to click in this empty texture slot and drop down standard and navigate to the V-Ray HDRI loader and double click that. Then I'm going to hit M to bring up our material editor, and I'm going to drag our V-Ray HDRI loader into one of the material editor slots as an instance, which is very important. From there, it's a simple case of browsing to the kind of HDRI that I want to use. Let's drop this down to EXR to make sure that it displays the EXR that I want to use. I'm going to double click that to show it large in the material editor. To make sure that we can see this correctly in the material editor and our viewport background, I'm just going to modify our multiplier values. So I'm going to change the overall multiplier to 0.1. And you can actually see that image now in the material editor. And then to make sure it renders correctly and compensate for that value there, I'm going to increase the render multiplier to 10. Following that, I'm going to change our mapping type from angular to spherical. Okay, another useful step in setting up our lighting is getting the HDRI displayed in our viewport background. This will help us to evaluate the sun direction and whatnot. So the way to do that is with our material editor still open, I'm going to hit 8 and bring up our environment and effects. Then I'm going to drag our V-Ray HDRI loader over into the environment map slot as an instance. That's important. So now basically our V-Ray dome light and our environment background are both linked to exactly the same HDRI loader. So let's close that and click in our camera viewport, and then with that viewport selected, I'm going to hit Alt B, and as we've just put that HDRI into the environment background, all I need to do is tick Use Environment Background and Display Background. Okay. And you will see that that has brought the HDRI into our viewport background. With that in place, I would now like to rotate my HDRI to get the sun into an appropriate location for lighting the scene. So I'm going to bring up the material editor, make sure I've got the V-Ray HDRI loader selected, and then just here under horizontal rotation, you can start rotating the sky to get the sun into the position you want. Having tested it before, I know that 135 is not a bad option. So that brings the sun and the major light source of the HDRI over into this corner on the left. With that done, I think I can try a test render. Okay, so here you can see our scene lit with the HDRI sky dome. You will notice that there's no strong, clearly defined shadows in this scene. There's a little ambient shadow, but nothing nicely sharp and contrasted. Also, if I switch to the alpha channel, you'll see our alpha is entirely solid, and we don't have a suitable alpha channel for use in post later on. So let's just solve those two problems. Before I do, I will actually save this render to our render history. Firstly, the alpha channel. You will remember, if I hit 8, earlier in the tutorial we introduced the sky dome into our environment map. So all we need to do is, with our light selected, make sure that light is set to invisible. So that will exclude it from the alpha channel. Now in terms of the shadows, let's just bring up our material editor, and with our HDRI loader selected, the solution to introduce more contrasted defined shadows is simply to reduce the gamma. So for this particular example, I'll reduce it from our default gamma 1 to 0.75. and then let's try rendering again. Okay, immediately you can see generally the scene is a little brighter, but we now do have some sharper, more defined shadows being generated by this primary light source of the sky dome here. If I save that to our render history and compare these two, you can see that quite clearly. Also, if I switch to alpha, you can see that now we have a usable alpha channel. So yeah, you can see there the defined shadows now introduced in that scene. One of the problems with the method of reducing the gamma is that it does affect the actual image itself. So if you are hoping to use this sky as part of your final render rather than replacing it in post-production later on, you would need to take that into account. You can see now the light source of the sun in this image is now completely blown out because we've affected the gamma. In addition, that will also affect the sky dome in reflections. You can see very clearly there that the reflection of that sky dome is being blown out in especially in the highlights right there. There are solutions for this, so let's take a look at those. Okay, the solution we'll explore in this part of the tutorial is probably the simplest one. It involves duplicating the sky dome we have and setting that gamma back to normal and using that sky dome as part of our environment and in our reflections. So I'll show you how to do that quickly. If I select the dome light, make sure Effect Specular is unchecked and Effect Reflections is unchecked. Then I will bring up our material editor. And let's name this HDRI loader Sky Gamma. So let's just do that again. Sky Gamma reduced. And then let's duplicate that. So we just click and drag it over to another slot. I'm going to change that to Sky Normal. And excuse me, this one I'm going to set the gamma back to normal and bring up our render settings, and under VRay, under the environment tab, I want to turn on our refraction override and drag our normal sky into the override slot as an instance. We'll close that and let's hit 8 to bring up our environment map. You see at the moment, as we'd included it before, our sky gamma reduced is in this slot, so I'm going to drag our normal one over and replace it. And now we can test render again. Okay, let's save that render to our render history and compare that one with the previous render. So you can see the actual scene itself has stayed the same. We still have the strong contrasted shadows, or reasonably contrasted shadows. We still have the same level of lighting, but if you see our reflection in our reflective sphere, and also the environment background, have changed back to the levels of the normal gamma value sky dome. In addition, we still have our usable alpha channel. So what you could effectively do is you could use the sky as it is if you decided you liked it, or select it and modify it, or you could completely replace that with another sky. But with this setup, we have the virtues of using both the sky in the background and reflections, and also the nice quality of light and usable shadows on the rest of the scene. The only caution I would raise about this method is that if you decide to change the position of your sun. For instance, if we change this to 25, you'll see in this in the environment slot here, our actual lighting, the sky dome which is controlling the lighting on the scene will change, but the one that appears in reflections and as part of our background will not, because this is a separate material. So it's very, very important that whatever you change your lighting to, you make sure that you change your reflection and environment HDRI to exactly the same thing. Otherwise you'll get very confusing results with reflections appearing where they shouldn't be, and your background appearing where it shouldn't be, and then light coming from a different direction. That's pretty much it. I mean, I think the solution will probably work very well for quite simple scenes where you don't see yourself tweaking the lighting endlessly, and certainly tweaking the position of the lighting endlessly. But that said, it is reasonably simple to just switch between these two and make sure that the horizontal rotation of those skies is the same in each instance. I think that's pretty much it for this tutorial. There are a couple other methods which are worth exploring, and I will introduce these in a part 2 section of the tutorial slightly later on. If you have any questions, please do feel free to leave a comment or get in touch. Thank you very much. I hope this was helpful.